I now invite our next dignitary, the Honorable Vance W. Amory, who served as Premier of Nevis during the period the 2nd June 1992 to the 11th July 2006, and also during the period 23rd January 2013 to the 16th of December 2017.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. President, I crave your indulgence to acknowledge the protocol established, but permit me to acknowledge the presence at this very august sitting of the Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Harris, and the living national hero, the first Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Kennedy Simmons, and the other serving members in leadership, but especially the Premier, whose instrumentality, I understand, was to have this special sitting. Mr. President, I want to, like the speaker before me, give due recognition to yourself for coordinating this very important sitting, and to also make reference to your note to myself in which you stated that as we are celebrating the 50th anniversary, that the disaster, that is the sinking of the Christena on the 1st of August 1970, had great historical value. I think that statement, Mr. President, is fundamental to what has happened in the last 50 years. And as you've heard from the first Prime Minister, he was part of the process to try to alleviate the suffering which sadly occurred on that fateful day. And I want to say, Mr. President, that Dr. Simmons may not remember, but I was one of his patients on that day. A young man, careless in my living, had developed ulcers and had to attend the clinic on that day. And as a little background to what I'm saying, I will say, I had left the clinic and had gone to Market Shop to come to Charlestown to get the medication which had been prescribed. And in waiting at the bridge, as we call it at Market Shop, for a bus, and the changes over these 50 years have been so stark and so developmental. For half an hour or more, there were no buses, because there were no buses. You got to live with somebody in a car or a truck or something like that. Mr. President, as it transpired, I had taught a former educator, Ines Morton, to learn to drive, taught her to drive. And she came and saw me at the bridge and stopped and asked me, "Son, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Charlestown." She said, "We'll hop in." She already had heard of the sinking of the Christena. And she, having a nephew on that boat, was clearly very distressed. And so I came with her to Charlestown on that afternoon, came to the pierhead here at Charlestown, and saw something which I will never forget as long as I live. Bodies of persons being thrown up out of the rescue boats onto the pier at the time and being transported to the hospital in open pickups. Such was the nature and the tragedy of what happened 50 years ago tomorrow. And so, Mr. President, as we have come today in this special sitting to commemorate, to remember, to reflect on that tragedy, I have not come to apportion any blame, but rather to look at the reality of what that historic event, as you have called it, what it has meant to us, the people of Nevis, and I'm sure the people of St. Kitts as well, and how we have over the years sought to address the shortcomings which led to that tragedy, and which has taught us a significant number of lessons which I believe we have learned and which we clearly will not want to forget. So the sinking of the Christena on that fateful day, 1st of August 1970, affected every single household in Nevis. And I can say that, Mr. President, without contradiction. Because our people in Nevis are a very close-knit community. And whether we were blood-related or we were just members of a community, as in Rollins or Hanley's Road or Brickhill or Newcastle or Jessop's or Cotton Ground or Craddock Road, wherever those persons who had gone that morning or the day before, as we've heard, to do their trade, to sell their goods, to carry on the economic activity of Nevis, trading between St. Kitts and Nevis, in goods produced in Nevis and goods produced in St. Kitts, there was some impact on every single household in this island of Nevis. And I say that because, Mr. President, our people at that time were very close-knit. The political divide was really between St. Kitts and Nevis. And I will go no further than that, because today is not a time to speak of such matters. But all of the hucksters, all of the persons who had been civil servants working in St. Kitts, students who had gone to St. Kitts for the weekend and were traveling back and lost their lives. And you heard from the Governor General's message, classmates, friends, colleagues suffered in that fateful historic event, and it touched the lives of all of us in this country. After I had taken Teacher Inez, as I called her, to the hospital, and fortunately her nephew was one of the survivors, we saw again and witnessed, or I saw again and helped to move bodies out of the pickups into the morgue. A gruesome but a necessary act for a young man who was there on the scene at the hospital. Again, it was not comforting to see people whom you knew, nor was it comforting to be handling the bodies of persons you did not know. But that was the impact of that tragedy on the 1st of August 1970. The week following, it's as if we were in a ghost town in this island of Nevis. And we look back at the work of the church leaders of the day, especially the pastors or the priests of the Anglican churches, Father Blunt, Father Eek, and the Catholic priest. And they had lost 2 of their nuns, which meant that it had hit very close to home to the Catholic Church. Reverend Telemark the Methodist minister at the time. And for that week, we were in a state of absolute depression and grief and mourning until the following weekend when there was a mass funeral service at Grove Park. I make mention of those things, Mr. President, because they are essential for us to understand the impact on those of us who were part of this whole process of dealing with the impact, that historic event which changed the lives and the direction in which St. Kitts and Nevis was to go. We were an agrarian society producing crops, vegetables, tree crops, trading in that to make a living. And the prominent persons really were the women. Our women were the ones who took leadership in that activity. And the number of women who lost their lives. And I said, of all of the areas. And when we listened on Tuesday to one Ozzy Tyson, who had an interview with Webber at Vaughan Radio, and he spoke of those persons whom he knew, and because he was a survivor, or is a survivor of that tragedy. It tells you that every household, the matriarchs of those households, the ones who gave leadership because of our societal development, were lost. And Mr. President, it has taken a toll on our country. And 50 years is, in history, not a long time. Because you yourself, Mr. President, spoke of the history of the Nevis Island Assembly, 1869, when the Assembly rejected the conjoining of St. Kitts and Nevis. You spoke also of the attempt which was made forcibly to create the Gordian knot in 1882 to put St. Kitts and Nevis together, about which Sir Fred Phillips late mentioned in his book. So in terms of history, it is not a long time. But in the lives of human beings individually and communally, it is not a short time. We have many lessons which we would have learned. Travel between St. Kitts and Nevis up to that point, and Mr. President, I traveled with Christena many times, having to go to St. Kitts to grammar school. It was not a pleasant journey at the best of times. At the worst of times, we were shunted around by the captain, who seemed then to take pleasure in shifting around myself and my then sixth form colleague, the Honorable Mr. Parry, who will speak to you in a while, shifting us around because we thought we could go up to the captain's bay because we had what we thought as sixth form students privileged position. But whenever there was a listing of the boat, and you've heard this from so many persons, it was not a safe boat for crossing the seas. But that is a fact of history which, sadly, we are here today to memorialize and to remember. But we've learned from that event that we cannot take chances. We must be certain of the persons who travel between our islands on our ferries. We have seen an improvement in the ferry service. We have seen an improvement in the economic development, a change of the impact, which impact caused by the Christena disaster. We have seen an economy in services develop in Nevis, which meant that the number of persons who would travel to St. Kitts for employment is not as great as it was then. And we have certainly seen a change in the welfare and the well-being of our people. My hope, Mr. President, is that our having and your having convened this meeting to look at the Christena disaster and having made reference to the memorial which is just west of us here, a memorial which was established in 2000 to commemorate the 30th anniversary. And may I say, Mr. President, it was not intended to create any friction. It was really created to ensure that there was that visible memorial to which people can come almost as a pilgrimage, if we want to call it that, to show our respects for those persons whose lives were sacrificed for the well-being or for the good, seeking to do good for their families and for our country. And we are pleased as an administration to have established that memorial. You made mention that the names of those who were lost are listed on that memorial. We may not know if those were all the names. This came as a result of persons indicating whom they believe were on the boat. There are some whom they did not know. But we will accept, Mr. President, that the memorial is there to ensure that the people of St. Kitts and Nevis recognize that we have learned and we value, as you said, this historic event which had such a disastrous effect on the lives of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. But we have learned, we have come some way from it, and time has a way of healing wounds. And I am praying as I speak to you and through you, Mr. President, that the wounds which were so stark and painful in 1970, that 50 years down the road, even though we cannot erase the memory, that we would have a softening of the effects. And those who have suffered, who suffered loss, especially the children. And I do remember the church taking an interest in ensuring that some of the children were taken care of. And I want to say to us today, Mr. President, that it was not, well, let me put it another way, it was a difficult time in our history. And we need to ever keep this matter in front of us, even as we seek to reconcile and to have the wounds which were opened then, have them healed, and to establish a greater and a closer relationship among our people within and between our two islands. May it please you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.